What you're about to hear is a conversation with Gabe from Helmgast about running Kult Divinity Lost. We invited him to share his experience and perspective as a game designer and GM, and to talk through how the game works at the table. This discussion assumes that you, the listener or viewer, have at least some prior experience with GMing role-playing games. We are not presenting this as a step-by-step tutorial or a classroom-style teaching session. Instead, this is a practical, conversational deep dive into mechanics, intent, and how GM and player moves function in actual play. Now, with that in mind, let's get into the conversation.
Welcome back, everyone. Thank you for joining us again for episode 2 for player moves and the basics for Kult Divinity Lost. We've talked about already a bit in the first episode, where we kind of branch over most of the basics, but there was way too much to tell in way too short time, and I think it's better to kind of make this a separate session. I'm David. I'm 1/3 of the Illusion HorrorCon. Happy to be here and talk about Kult and the rules and GMing this beautiful system. Crystal, who are you?
Who am I? Crystal. I am another third of the Illusion HorrorCon admin team. And yeah, very excited to continue to delve into the Kult Divinity Lost from a GM perspective.
And with us, we have Gabe. And Gabe, first, who are you? And then maybe, what did we talk about last time?
Okay, I am Gabe, aka Gabe the Herald. You might know me from the Kult Elysium server and the Illusion Horror and Con Discord server as well. And I've been working with Paternalo, the creative director of Kult Divinity Lost. So I'm working for Helmgast in the game, the Kult. And I do a little bit of everything. I write, I edit, I do a bit of the game design. So I'm just his right hand and trusted servant. I've been doing this for 4 years and playing for a longer time, and I'm here to share my GM expertise, or so I hope, specifically for Kult GMing. And last time we introduced the basics of GMing Kult, which is the conversation, so the understanding of the exchange of GM moves and player moves. Hopefully by now you understand that GMing is a role of understanding and adjusting the pressure of the scenes and the story through GM moves that are anything that you do as a GM. We went over what are soft and hard moves, and softer and harder moves, and how they can show up in the story and what usually happens when they do. And one thing that I really cannot remember if we talked about, but it is important to say here as a branch, in the session 0, you should be doing the horror contract, which some people might call the lines and veils or some other name. And it's important for you to know this, and I forgot to add, because dialing up or down the pressure requires you to know where can you go and how much pressure you can add and which buttons to press for that. And knowing what you can't, which is the focus of the horror contract, what you can't do as a GM, where you can't go, is informative to know where you can go and what buttons you can press and how much pressure you can introduce. Either way, we talked a bit about player moves and we missed the attributes. We have 2 types of attributes, passive and active. And just to get over it real quick, passive attributes are tied to moves that are triggered passively in the fiction. So the character isn't actively doing something to trigger the move. There is a bit of controversy in that because I like the player to actually dodge the harm, to roll to avoid harm, but some people trigger it passively. So someone counterattacks and the GM asks for a avoid harm. It doesn't really matter. It's about style and flavor and whatever. The passive attributes are fortitude. So when you suffer harm, keep willpower or keep it together, which is when you exercise self-control and mental resistance, and reflexes for ducking out of the way and dodging, or you get it. And the active attributes, there are a bunch of them, which is reason, you use to investigate, perception, to observe a situation, intuition, to read a person, coolness, to act under pressure, charisma, to influence other, violence, to engage in combat, and soul, to see through the illusion. We went over one of the basics is to understand when to call for moves, and we had an entire scene improv in the moment where we discussed what move to call for that kind of situation. So if you don't remember, just go back and watch it again. But it was rather fun to talk about that, and I hope it helped people to understand that there's no precise chemistry or mathematics of calling moves. It's more of a feeling of wanting to add pressure or not, or managing the risk of adding pressure or not. And for this episode or series of questions and talks we're going to focus on willpower, so keeping it together, and soul, seeing through the illusion. Mm-hmm. And because one is heavily tied to the other, we'll begin with the one that is heavily tied to the other, which is keeping it together. So the bare basics of it is the trigger. When you exercise self-control to keep from succumbing to stress, traumatic experiences, psychic influence, or supernatural forces, you roll plus willpower. And a bunch of stuff can happen from this. 15 plus, whatever you're trying to resist, you resist. So if there is a monster trying to get you to act in a certain way, for example, one of the typical lictors with commanding voice, he tells you to drop the gun, and so you keep it together to not drop the gun. If you roll 15 plus, you keep the gun, you don't drop it. If you roll 10 to 14, which is a success with complications, the resistance instills a condition. So you get to keep the gun, you get to resist whatever. So maybe the threat is to avoid freezing in panic when you see David's true visage, the killer of last episode. Maybe he's a monster. And the GM says to the player that they see David, and one of David's abilities is whenever someone sees your true form, they become paralyzed by fear. So you let the player keep it together to avoid that. 10 plus, player does it, character does it. But there's a condition. They either get an emotional reaction and lose stability, or they become obsessed, distracted, or will be haunted by the experience. And I know we're gonna go over each of them, so I'll just jump to failure. And failure is you fail. But as we said in the last episode, the idea of a failure is, the idea of a move is, can you do that safely? And you might resist at a huge cost. So maybe you cannot block the monster's commanding voice, and you lose stability. You keep the weapon, but there's the assaulting images that you have to tackle at the moment, and you lose 4 stability at a very maximum. Or you can just drop the gun. I, as a GM, usually offer the choice. You resist at a huge personal cost or not. That's the very, very, very basics of it. But I have my fellow GMs here to raise their questions and give their input. So I'll begin by asking, what is the biggest difficulty you have with Keep It Together as a GM or player?
I would say, bringing it back to when I started playing Kult and coming from other systems and games, for me the hardest part was to not overuse it, to continuously kind of bring it up in situation where it created more issue than it was using for, because also like for the intent of storytelling, Keep It Together is a very strong kind of trigger and lever basically to bring your story forward, backward, sideways, depending on what happens. It can significantly impact the scene that you're in. So I think coming from different system, one might tend to overuse it rather than to kind of focus on the scenes where it's necessary. And I think, when is it necessary? It is, as it described, when you have to exercise self-control, but that can mean that can also be something when the player character has to deal with drug intoxication, or he saw a emotional traumatizing event like a murder or a scene, or even more than that, something that he shouldn't have seen. It should be impactful, and it loses its characteristic as a major kind of component for Kult when it's overused, and the players kind of get numb to kind of, oh, again, keep it together. Oh, again, keep it together. It's not the way I think you want to run your game, because not only do your characters drop quickly in stability and kind of go a bit more unhinged, technically, if they play their character right, but it also doesn't help really in the story building in itself. That was my biggest concern or issue. When and how often you would actually use it, in what scenes. I think that was, for me, the point.
Yeah, I can answer that and then move to Crystal's biggest difficulty. Okay. Or if it's around if it's in the same realm, you can...
Yeah, I think it's in a similar realm to what David said. And maybe, using it in situations to have it be the most impactful. And again, I think I mentioned this in the last episode, the idea of immersion of the player move. So not just, especially with the success with complications, there's, choices that you have for emotions. And maybe maybe in the beginning I was sticking to those very closely, but is there a way that you can expand on these things, on these emotional, can your players choose something else that is more that is more fitting to the scene? Are there other things you can do within this player moves that are more fitting to the scene that will still have the impact of something like this? Like,
very, very basics of the GM. The keep it together is tied to the stability track, which functions somewhat like a death spiral sort of thing, because the less stability you have, the less you're able to keep it together and resist the disadvantages. So if you lose 3 stability, you're already at shaken and you got -1 on keep it together, and it makes the roll more likely to be a failure in the future, and you lose more stability. So, and this is to say that you should be seeing, as a GM, the stability track as its own pressure valve thing, because you want players to be able to gain stability at some point, but you want to keep it somewhere around the what the player is like giving at the table. So it doesn't matter much if you have a character at anxious, which is super low, at critical stress, that's a -2 keep it together, -3 to disadvantages, and the player is acting like the character is acting super blasé about stuff, doesn't feel any pressure, doesn't feel like anything emotional out of what's happening. So you want to bump it up and bump it down. But when do you use it, and how do you not overuse it? What I do is to really focus on when you exercise self-control. A lot of people don't run it this way, but this is my request for you to try something different as a GM if you don't do what I'm about to say. I know Peter does it different than me, and that's his own style, but bear with me again. When something happens that is horrific, or something happens that the player would lose agency of the character, that's when you want the player to exercise self-control, and that's when you ask what they do. Really zoomed in, it might be that the character, finds a horrific, like, terrible crime scene, and you say, well, that's a keep it together for pretty much every human being with a sliver of empathy left. They will be affected. So what do you do to exercise self-control? So maybe the character will step out of the crime scene and, smoke a cigarette for a while and drag some of the cigarette and drink some booze to cope with that. Or they will just, say a prayer, or will whatever. Either way, player has to do something. Isn't really necessary. I know Peter, for example, will just ask you to keep it together, and a lot of the scenarios have it written in them. So you see something awful and you just have to keep it together. However, when you ask the player to keep it together, you should also be establishing what do they have to resist. So simply looking at the crime scene and being revulsed, maybe, and that's me as a GM knowing, about the pressure valve and my moves, maybe you can just swap away one stability and be done with it. So if you look at the scene, you feel immediately bad about what you see. This is awful, the smell is awful, the visuals are awful, it's super graphic, whatever, -1 stability. So you're not overusing it. But if you're gonna roll, something has to happen. So if the detective fails to be at the scene. Will she be able to come back? Will she just cry? Will she just be frozen for a moment? You have to know what will happen. And as you ask yourself this question, you will realize that at some moments in the game, you're asking for the player to keep it together just because something's awful. So, and maybe that's the hint that either you should do something about it and introduce a fail state, something that happens, or not ask for it at all and maybe take one stability. Now, another huge thing for Keep It Together is, and it's written in the guidance below the move, is that player characters can be desensitized to what happens. So if the player character, the PC, has resisted the commanding voice and became angry once, I will keep it as a pressure thing for a bit longer. But if next time with this -1 stability that the player character had and a -1 from the condition, maybe they will have a success to roll a 15 plus, and that's when they become desensitized. So when the creature speaks again with the commanding voice, they don't have to roll, they just resist it. They have resisted before, they know what's going to happen, and they just exercise self-control automatically. On the other hand, I could, as a harder, maybe one of the hardest, if not the hardest GM move, is to rob the agency of the player for a moment and just say that they will fail to resist whatever this is. So a really powerful creature will infect you with nightmares, will be able to make you drop the gun, will be able to have you fall to your knees. That's the where the GM moves come in. So you have to know, what are you doing in the story as a GM? Where do you want the story to go? And whether or not you want more pressure. Because when you tell the player, this happens, you fall to your knees and you drop the gun and you just cry. This is a hard move. And you resolve the conflict. You tell the player that they cannot resist the voice. But if you allow a Keep It Together, then the story can continue to branch. But having this knack, being attuned to this feeling of when to call for a roll, when to do a softer move and ask for a roll, if the player's action fits, will be a good guide for this. And for the emotional part of it, does it make sense what I said so far?
Yeah.
Am I just rambling here?
No, it makes sense what you're saying. I do want to add maybe another option, and I've done this sometimes with certain groups, depending on my players. But I will, and you've mentioned this for other moves as well. But I would offer either you can roll for Keep It Together, or you just tell me how your player character would react to this situation. Just describe what happens to you. How do you feel? What do you do? Like, what do you think your character is going to do in this situation? And again, I don't do this with all tables, just because certain tables are more interested in rolling dice than others. And there are certain players that I can trust to actually put themselves in their player character's mind and do what they actually think the player character would do. But I find that can be more impactful than introducing just a roll just because.
No, that's an excellent addition. And the GM could, for example, let the player establish let the player say they want to roll because they like rolling, and instead of just saying what the character does, they say what happens on a success and on a failure, and roll to see whatever comes out of it. That's a super valid way to do it. I've done it as well. Nowadays, and that's because you get to play with the same people for a long time, and you just mesh well and whatever. My players will just say when they think it's a keep it together moment or a lose stability moment. I do remind them, especially when it's obvious that something would get you, like impact you, like it shock you in a way. But yeah, I think like the ideal cult group will have a mix of all of those options.
Yeah.
But none of them like becoming like strict, like getting like strictly to one of them is not necessarily wrong. And naturally you'll do all of them in a campaign, even a one shot.
Yeah. I think for Keep It Together especially too, for me sometimes it's one of the only move, it is the only move that I often also try to couple to the character's backstory and their kind of history, basically. So if there's something that the scene would reflect upon that I know happened in their dark secret or their backstory, I try to kind of highlight it and describe it. And it's coming back to Crystal's point of immersion, right? Why this is so impactful to them. And I basically, I go with what you just said, Gabe, that I tend to not ask them to roll for it. I just describe the scene the best way that I can immerse the players into that scene and let them decide, like, oh yeah, if it clearly it reminds me of, my mother being dead on the floor or something. Yeah, I need to roll for Keep It Together. And they usually do this naturally. And then you already create a basically lever for the characters to kind of continue the narrative without having to think of how do I need to react? How do I need to kind of be or portray this? If you strictly kind of ask for a role and have the players like pick a decision or choose between one of the conditions, it can be sometimes difficult. And that's again, as you said, Gabe, if you play with a group together for a long time, like you know your chemistry, you basically barely have to kind of even ask for roles anymore because they will do pretty much everything in the background that they just tell you what happens. But like for new GMs, I think it's important, to not to ask for a role when you think it's necessary or when a book kind of guides it, but try to couple it with something that connects the situation with the player. Why is it so much more impactful for that one character compared to the other? Why is the hard detective who has been to 50 million crime scene not as much affected by this than the young rookie who just started his job? But then also consider,
or vice versa, which
or
might
vice
be more
versa.
interesting.
Exactly. What happens then after the role happened? Why suddenly is the rookie more hardened in this situation? But like, try to focus the explanation, or let the players describe the situation based on their kind of background and their monologue. I try to interfere as little as possible with Keep It Together and let most likely the players decide fully kind of how this impacts them. I just set the scene with immersion, and that's where also horror contract, like how far can you go, how far can you push, and just to be aware, like we're talking about Kult Divinity Lost, which is a very dark and disturbing game. It can be, so make sure that you know the limits that you don't want to cross, and then you can bring these up in these situations, because if they fail, you can then push it a bit further and a bit further and a bit further and a bit further, and it creates this beautiful, disturbing scene, which is obviously why we play this game, right?
And to pick up from the where we left the scene, because I know some people wanted examples of the moves in play and the GM thinking behind the whole scene and whatever. So Crystal, and if you don't remember, quick recap. Crystal entered an apartment to search for clues. It's a crime scene, and she doesn't know it yet, but it's David, a supernatural creature disguised as human. And what happens is that a janitor found someone. He doesn't care that it's Crystal or whoever. They are possessed. Well, he is possessed by David, who can possess people. And Crystal doesn't know it yet. And Crystal is the only character. And the janitor got a gun because he has a gun, because it's that kind of game.
Because he's a bad man.
Yeah, and we're playing like super action-y Kult in the 90s thing, and everyone has guns. So a shootout begins, and Crystal manages to jump behind cover, and we have this quiet moment where her intent was to either find a way out, but mostly scare the janitor away. But she doesn't know that the janitor is possessed. I, as a GM, know, and I need the pressure to go up, because even though we have a super pressure-y scene, it's a shootout, so at the very least, the basic stake is she can get shot and maybe die, so that's a lot of things. But for a high-action game, that's the minimum. So I need to bump up the horror, I need to bump up the pressure, and I need to reveal something about the antagonist, which is David. And I offered her an opportunity without a price to observe a situation. And in my head, I already know that I want to reveal something specific to the janitor being possessed. I don't know how exactly, because I like to improvise, and I just came up with the idea that David is possessing the janitor. But I know what I want to reveal. So she rolls, and she gets 2 questions because she's a detective and has high perception. Or we define that it was low perception and high intuition. But whatever, 2 questions, super lucky, bro. And she knows that the janitor shouldn't be this defensive about the crime scene. So she asks, what is being hidden from me? And I was already, keen on using 1 question to reveal the possession, but I say, well, you peek at the janitor and you see that actually one of your shots landed. And he's hurt. He's super hurt. But he acts as if nothing happened. Now, would you like to see more of it? And this is another opportunity, like a GM move without a price. I'm just offering to, would you like to just get a tiny bit outside of cover and see where did you hit? And I'll reveal that you actually got it right in his forehead. And what you actually see is the janitor bleeding, huge gaping wound in his face, and it's clear that he's possessed because he's my typical possession thing, holding a gun. And then GM style, I could just I wouldn't swap stability away because I offered the opportunity to see what's going on. So I might ask Crystal, so how do you react? And then you have to give in a little room for the player to show their style as well. And she might be one of the people that will say that, I don't know, I want to roll. But what happens if you fail? I scream, I freeze, and then you as a GM can pitch in your own ideas as well. But pressure is going up because there's a chance of, getting this hard-boiled detective to freeze in front of the threat, in front of the thing that wants to kill them. So that's just you introducing the pressure that you wanted to introduce from the get-go. And that's where, keep it together comes in. Or maybe not. But we're focusing on this move, so... and getting to the emotional consequences. Let's say Crystal... The fail state would be Crystal freezing in terror. She's never seen anything like this. In fact, that might just be the first time she sees something overtly supernatural. And she will also keep it together, and it's a success with complications, and she will choose one of the emotional complications. So she'll have a strong angry reaction or sad reaction, scared or guilt-ridden. Either way, all of them apply a -1 ongoing to all rolls where the condition applies. I guess most obviously for a hard-boiled character would be being scared for the first time. And maybe from now on, she's going to have -1 to continue fighting with this creature because she's scared of engaging. There's this, we might frame it as her being afraid of never being able to kill this thing, So we establish, okay, so if you want to engage, that's a -1. If you want to flee, I guess scared helps, so you don't get a -1. When does a condition fade? So it fades when you had time to recuperate, in rules terms, it's when the character has a moment of respite. Maybe they gain stability, maybe they find time to breathe in and concentrate a little, and maybe they just flee the scene and scared clears because the threat is nowhere to be seen right now. Or you as a GM, and again, pressure, maybe you want her to be scared for longer, and so you ask the player if it would make sense for the character to remain scared, and maybe sleep badly this night and continue like this until she finds time to engage in a vice. Maybe she gets time to drink or smoke or whatever until release pressure from her own head. And to avoid leaving only at that, we have the other conditions, which is obsessed, and she gains a relation to the event. And what it means is, because this is a relation, and whenever she engages with possessed people, again, she doesn't know David is possessing them. She might have an inkling of a hunch about this, but when she finds those people, because she's obsessed, it will shape her behavior. And because it's a relation, she might regain stability by encountering it again. It will ground her in reality, in the illusion. And we'll get into the illusion shortly. This obsessed is different from the disadvantage, the player move obsessed, that the character might have. And it sticks with the character for, again, as long as it makes sense. The other option is you become distracted. So instead of a -1, we establish that the character just gets, knocked out because of it, like thrown off balance. So maybe the world begins to spin. She becomes afraid of what might happen to her. Maybe she's trying to look for a way out because she has an additional question to when she observed a situation, and she's now distracted. And this modifier will play with the modifier of observe a situation, because again, we're coming from that. And we describe that she knows how to flee, but now she cannot stop thinking about the creature. And so instead of a +1, because she is distracted, which is a -2, she will have a -1 to act on the answer of observe a situation. And you will be haunted by the experience at a later time. It's just you, as a GM, being fed some ammo to shoot the character later. So maybe the next time she gets into a shootout, she will suffer with visions from this, and this is a condition, so she will have a -1. Maybe she will have nightmares and won't be able to recover stability by sleeping in the safety of a friend's house. It's just you. In the future, you have to bring this back, you know? How you do that depends on the GM moves you want to bring up. It might just be that at a later time, she might have to keep it together again, maybe to even get into a gunfight, maybe even to shoot someone in the head, maybe to get into another crime scene, at the fear of something like that protecting the place again. So, and you're bringing keep it together again to enter the scene, to even consider going there. Yeah, that's it for the conditions. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah.
Did I make sense? I have the tendency to ramble, so do stop me.
I think, yeah, one of them, I mean, the emotional consequences are, I think, pretty straightforward. And I would also say, like, the 4 given are the most 4 broad reactions you could have as a player character. But as a GM, don't be afraid to just ask the players, like, how do you really react? Like, if they come up with something better, which they usually do, use that. And that is their condition in that moment. I don't like to kind of push an emotional consequence onto them until I really have to. I'd rather have them describe kind of how they feel. The distracted another time, well, I guess the last 3 are sometimes often questioned more so. And the first one is the big +1 relationship when you become obsessed. So, and I often have players or new players also ask, like, so can I become obsessed with a location? Or is it only a person? Or, how does the relationship work? If it's a building that I become obsessed with, but I never visit it again, how does that +1 affect me? So it's basically a get out of jail free card for that condition. Is that correct?
No. It does seem like it, but what happens to someone that is obsessed by something, right? Obsessed people have the tendency to come back to the topics that they are obsessed about. And please make me talk about this again in the investigation series. But this is you as a GM, again, getting more ammo to introduce new stuff to the story and bringing back things. Maybe as you improvised this crime scene, you thought it would be just a one-off, get in, get a clue, get out. But now you have this location that the player character will keep dreaming about, will keep bringing it up in the future, and it's entirely in your jurisdiction to ask the player, what does the character do to refrain from bringing every conversation down the drain because of this topic? Because you're continuing the conversation, the investigation, and later you'll meet someone that is willing to help, but you'll be locked into that one place again. And I guess it's one of those moments that you as a GM may say, is it fair for you to keep it together to resist from talking about that crime scene and what happened? You sense that this might dissuade this person from helping you because you're going to talk about the man that didn't die from a headshot. So would you like to? But then if you simply talk about it, we can agree on upping your stability by 1 because you have +1 relation to that event, to that location. And it inevitably, more stability leads to more a character that is more grounded in reality, in the illusion, in the he's being or she is being pulled out of their madness, out of their stuff, their mind stuff. And it's one of those things you can keep bringing. The same would happen in the haunted thing. And maybe if the player character was haunted instead of obsessed, you could say the same things. So, well, you're talking to this person, but you keep thinking of that place. You keep thinking of that janitor. So what do you do? Do you want to talk about it? Do you feel like we should venture into this? Should you keep it together to stop yourself from doing that? And this is a softer GM move. As a hard GM move, you could just, you lose stability if you don't talk about this. This is really gripping you. So the player has agency, but it's, it's you asking them to roleplay the thing that they
it's an
wanted
ultimatum.
because you choose the condition. So as a player, you're telling the GM that you want to do that. You want to roleplay the obsession. So it feels like, okay, this is a moment you can do that instead of you forcing the player to. I think that's it for obsessed. And if the player continues to be obsessed, you can have them get a disadvantage, the obsession disadvantage, and you handle obsession in different ways. We're going to enter the advantages and disadvantages later. And we're going to enter this round, but there's a different ways to handle obsession. And one of them is the obsession disadvantage. So swap one of the disadvantages or add one to the character sheet. Talk with the player, maybe they won it. Or add a dramatic hook. So talk about the event. And the player gets experience by engaging.
Right.
It's also a good thing.
So let me just clarify one thing. So we said that the emotional reactions, they kind of fade after a recuperation scene when the character had some time to kind of like digest it. Does the same happen with the relationship scene? Or the haunted another time?
I would say for the obsession and haunted, I would say so. I guess it depends, because in a way the player wants to hold on to the relation, like the positive relation, because it gives stability. So like, from a game perspective, you don't want to let it vanish. But it might just be, and that's because the rules have to follow the fiction, it might just be that if it stops making sense, you should just erase it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that is the same for any of the conditions. It's the same for any other thing in the character sheet. If it stops making sense that the character would have the obsessed disadvantage, you should just change it or get it out, or, same goes for wounds. If you have a stabilized wound that hasn't come into play for a long time and you're just occupying space and preventing the player from, and you sense this, that it's preventing the player from being more adventurous in conflicts, you should just take it out because it makes sense. But it makes for different kinds of games. Some people will not remove wounds, for example, but some will. Different genres. I feel like a John Wick sort of game, like Laughing Matters from the Broken Reflection books that I've written, and Night Carnage require you to erase wounds a lot of the time, because the idea is that you engage in hyper violence. So you're missing a limb and bleeding, but there's no wound in your character sheet. It's just so different styles of games. But the same would be for Haunted. If it makes sense that you've run out of ideas and you'd just be pushing the player to engage with a location that you just don't want to bring about anymore, just don't bring it up. And maybe if the player asks, oh, can I dream about it once more, then you introduce it. But as far as the -1 goes, I feel like most GMs will have a sense of not applying the negative modifier to rolls.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Before we move from Keep It Together, we do have a -9 roll that a lot of people associate with reducing stability. And you as a GM, and this is perhaps the most important bit of the move, you as a GM, you have to understand when failing to resist whatever the player was attempting to resist is enough. So seeing David's true form freezes me, which now makes the GM do a hard move of deal damage. So I am frozen. I fail to keep it together. I am frozen. I take a serious wound. That's a super hard move. Do I have to lose stability, or is this enough? And again, pressure. I lose 3 stability and I take a serious wound. That's super lethal.
Yeah.
But that's you as a GM making it so. The rules as written don't require you to do that. 1 stability loss is enough most of the time. But sometimes some things are super horrific, and if there's no additional risk, maybe you want to swap more. But most of the time I feel like freeze, fight, or flight are enough, and freeze being you keep doing what you're doing. So a police officer would be screaming, freeze, freeze, stop right there, but never shoot. He's just frozen, he's just looping. And me seeing David's true form would be me freezing as well. I just stand there in sheer shock, and I don't know what to do, and I do nothing, and I get attacked. And fight, it's obvious, you fight for your life, but fight means something else in different scenes. Maybe fight when you fail to keep it together in a crime scene, like looking at a crime scene situation fills you with the urge to solve the case, and you get angry, and then you get haunted, and then you get super obsessed, and maybe you gain the new disadvantage. And flight or flee might just be that I vanish. I'm out. So at the side of a crime scene, maybe I cannot stomach being here, and I'll be out, and I cannot come back again. And my friend Crystal will have to come in later. That's a story branch. Maybe my friend Crystal will have to come later and get the clue herself, and hopefully not get shot by the janitor. Or you just remove yourself from the case in a very super extreme reaction. I don't want this anymore. If Crystal wants to come in and deal with this, she can do that. I won't be here to see what happens, and I am out. So different, things to do, but most of the time that's enough. And you have to use the stability matter as a guide, because you as a GM know that the less stability, the more the disadvantages will come into play, and the less keep it together the character will succeed at. And so for most of the time, you want to remain at the serious stress and reserve critical and broken for when the shit truly hits the fan.
Yeah.
And you know when you want that to happen. As a GM, you're guiding the story towards that point. So if I know that Crystal will, after this, she will know where David is and she's going to storm the place, and she's seen what David's capable of, and she knows her friend bailed on her and she's alone. She has no other option but to do this. I, as a GM, will give her the option to go there, and I might leave her at an anxious or critical stress and see what comes. But this is the crescendo of the pressure of the grand finale of the conflict.
Right.
But yeah, that's it from me for Keep It Together. When you're past critical stress, the character is broken. So it's beyond unhinged. It's beyond... the character loses her grip on reality. And you have specific GM moves you do at any time you want. Again, these are part of the same guidance of the general GM moves. And if they are not specifically in the general GM moves, they can be somehow included elsewhere. For example, one of them is to manifest the character's dark secret or activate a disadvantage. These are more or less what's written in the Madness chapter, for example, for the Madness moves, Madness GM moves. Regardless, when the character is broken, some people, and just to get it out of the way, some people consider it at critical stress, so they continue to get negative modifiers to Keep It Together and disadvantage, and a positive modifier for C3D Illusion. Some people don't. It's not clear in the text, and we've gone back and forth about this in the Elysium server. If you're not in, by all means, consider getting in to talk about rules and all that. Or reach out in the Illusion server as well, or shoot us a message, whatever. Anyways, I do sometimes one and sometimes the other, and I know some people are very adamant on doing either or. But you do one of these moves, which is activate a disadvantage at a failure effect. So you can get like 3 hold. You can rob the agency of the character for a moment. In the Illusion and Borderlands book, we have in the grip of the disadvantage. So when the character reaches broken or as a maximum expression of the disadvantage, we tell that the GM may warp the story like completely around the disadvantage. And we have some examples for each of the disadvantages, plus the ones presented in the book, which is totally valid. The illusion crumbles, and we'll get around illusion stuff in a bit. Shift the character in time and or space, meaning that something in the illusion malfunctions, and maybe if Crystal would break in the crime scene, she shifts back in time to the moment where David killed the person, the victim. Might be an option. Get a new disadvantage, so maybe that's when Crystal loses her last bit of stability. She already was obsessed with the crime scene and all that, and then you get a mental compulsion to talk about this scene, about this David, about this janitor you saw, and this disadvantage. One of the ways to deal with obsessions. These choices, and then there's the self-destructive, taking your own life. I don't want to trigger YouTube's defense mechanisms here, but there's this option, and something happens when the character dies. You as a GM have the final say. We might get into death when we talk about injury after we talk about the illusion. So there's this. You can make me talk about this. You can ask me again. I'll probably forget. But these do not mess with the stability track. There's the option to manifest the character's dark secret as well, which is kind of madness thing, passion thing, can be whatever. The character remains broken. And what broken means is different for each game, and you have to have a understanding of madness and insanity and mental illness, and you have to understand that madness, like capital M madness, is the soul attempting to escape the prison that humanity is in. So what you see is actually the truth. You're not like mentally ill. You don't have schizophrenia like someone else, like a sleeper might have. What you see, despite being labeled by other sleepers as schizophrenia, is actually the truth. You do actually see shadows moving like amongst humanity. You do actually see world shifting shenanigans. Like you see streets being vanished, but actually being like flickered out of existence by creatures moving their machinery on top of whatever. You see those things, and they are true. And mental illness is mental illness as we know it. There's an entire chapter about madness in Kult that you should read to get a sense. And we expand it in the Illusion and the Borderlands book that is yet to be released as of now, but if you pre-ordered it, you get the beta PDF and you can read it right away. But then good stuff to keep in mind. So when the character is broken, you have to decide whether it's mental illness, it's a factual trauma, like mind-shattering thing, never coming back, never, I'll have post-traumatic stress disorder, or yeah, that's the right word,
Yeah.
or I'll become paranoid or whatever, or if it's the character seeing things. And once you know that, you know how to handle broken characters. They recover stability the same way anyone else recovers stability. So interact with a relation. Whenever they have a moment of respite, you can award them with stability. If they have an advantage that lets them recover stability, that's also an option. You don't want to keep them at broken for too long, I think, because you risk keeping the pressure valve super high at all times. And the thing is, pressure, like keeping pressure, is an art. And so if you keep it super high all the time, you just redefine what high pressure means. Mm-hmm. Hence why Crystal getting a gun and engaging in a shootout scene isn't really pressure. It becomes pressure or pressuring when she realizes the janitor doesn't die.
Right.
Okay. And there's the other options. So instead, the GM may give the broken character one of these options, and it's to undergo a change, which is switching attributes and improving stability, changing direction of the character's life and changing the archetype and improving stability, or catching a glimpse of the truth and gaining experience and improving stability. So if you want the broken character to understand something about reality, but you want it to be something fast, you can give them that and move on. Improve stability, redefine what's keeping it together worthy, like desensitizing the character a bit and moving on. Yeah, I think that's it.
Yeah. Okay.
Any questions? Any additions? Any corrections?
I actually think I have not been doing this rules as written. I've kind of been taking like a choice from up top and a choice from the bottom and kind of mixing them together. That's what I usually do. But yeah, I mean, Gabe, you did mention that you don't really use the broken rules as written. Do you have a different way to do it, or does it depend on the narrative on the table?
Me? I heard David, so I cut.
Oh, sorry, no.
Cut this weird bit. I don't use broken as written. Yes, that's true. What I usually do is that when the character breaks, it's at the final bit of the arc, and I try to make it like, okay, the story sort of ends here, and if we continue playing, we pick up from like a serious change, and I do decide whether if it's the truth that they're seeing, if it's mental illness that they have now. I don't know if it's the respectful way to say that, but that's the idea. I don't particularly like for characters to break in the middle of a story. I think it redefines the narrative too much. And if we're having an investigation, I don't jive with it too well. But in the case it happens, it's usually disadvantage at -9 and some madness move, so physical distortion or manifesting a fear in physical form. Both moves, I think, in the core rules, but also mentioned again in the Illusion and Borderlands Beyond, in the Borderlands of Madness chapter or section. Does David use it as written?
I think I also use it similar to Crystal, kind of to activate something that affects the characters for experiencing something weird. And then as a momentum to keep the story forward, I also use the kind of second part to kind of restore their stability. Because like often enough, it happens sometimes that characters just roll pretty badly. And then at the end, you like an hour in and 2 of the characters are broken because they've never seen things before. So instead of like maintaining the broken condition, I think it made sense in the stories that we kind of run so far that these events happened in both triggers. But yeah, I guess it does change it, because in our case then we didn't have the stipulation that the character maintained his broken status, but rather he got broken, he recovered, but he also learned something about the event. It's like it's this brief moment of like, I'm going above and beyond, and I'm like, something brings me back. But again, we also do this very immersive, like we usually try to couple this with the player's actions and the player character's actions and how they would respond to that situation of being broken. Because more often than not, these situations only happen either with like a significant sanity loss of seeing something emotional in a nightmare or something that is tormenting them. And so at that moment, the character usually has some idea about how to kind of bring this back in. And I think in that case, it makes sense to kind of give them a bit of, the carrot and the stick, but neither is really good. So it helps to restore them, kind of give them a bit of leeway of like acting a bit more rational, but also to understand that that moment when they broke, something broke with them. They saw something beyond this reality. And I think narratively it also makes sense, because if it happens early on, and you, in our case, we use both, you give them the idea of like, wait, so did that just really happen? Are there like other creatures amongst us? Fuck, now I don't know even what is true or not anymore. Like, is this really David, or is this massive monster that I just saw a moment ago? I think it can maintain the narrative as well if you do a combination of both. I think choosing one, it definitely makes it harder. But yeah, again, this is our, I think, house rule that we misinterpreted when we started to play, and it worked out so far pretty fluently.
Yeah.
To the extent that we played it.
Of role-playing games. If it works, it works.
It does. Yeah.
Exactly.
If it works, if it's fun, if it makes sense, then the rules should be there to reflect the fiction. And if you do the fiction in a way that makes sense to use the rule this way, this is me encouraging GMs to homebrew and to do it as you want, do as you like.
I mean, if you do that, I think it should be stated in the intentions of in the beginning, session 0, or even before, what kind of GM are you? Because I say pretty much up front, I'm not a rules lawyer. I think the rules are there to support the narrative, but I'm going to do what's most interesting for the narrative and for your characters. And if it doesn't go along with the rules, I am okay with that. And if you're not okay with that, then maybe I'm not the GM for you.
That's fair. And reasonable. And expected, I feel like it's...
Yeah.
That's what I would want my GM to say. To make it clear whether I'll be served what I like or not. And if not, we're just going to make it painful for the both of us.
Right.
But I wanted to bring up also that each of the levels, and before that, some players, some GMs have this difficulty understanding when to apply the modifiers. So to make it clear, composed doesn't have any effect, but uneasy and unfocused are considered moderate stress, and they have the -1 to disadvantage rolls. Then shaken, distressed, and neurotic are serious stress, so -1 to keep it together, -2 to disadvantage, and then anxious, irrational, and unhinged are critical stress. So you apply if the player character falls within that one level, they have those conditions always. I say this because I've seen some people question whether, for example, neurotic would have -2 to disadvantage rolls because it's written next to distressed, and they believe it's either way. You understand?
It's a whole category that encompasses all 3 of the serious, or all 2 of the serious stress conditions.
Yeah. And the names for each of the levels, I want to emphasize that at least how I do it, and I think it's the right way, these are guidances to the player, and it informs the GM how they should frame the perspective of the character. Because when you introduce a location or an NPC to the player, it is through that lens. And if it's not, it should be. So if the character is at composed, you should be making it clear, more or less, when something's not right, when they should be starting to feel afraid of something. And that's you actually actively saying, yeah, you enter this place and it feels dangerous to you. The character might feel something different about it, though, so they might be scared or not, but it feels dangerous. You look at it and it's a scary place. A unfocused character, an uneasy, someone at moderate stress, you as a GM, you have the window, the open window to say, yeah, this place is dangerous. You feel it. You might be jumped here, so you're more on edge. If you're distressed, neurotic, bordering critical stress, the GM has the opening to be even more, hammer the idea of a scary place even more. So you think you see a shadow moving there. You think you see something in the dark. You think you hear. So the word think is strong here. You're not confirming. By all means, the player character can observe a situation, can investigate, see if there's actually someone in the dark, but you're hinting and you're keeping the pressure and you're pushing that button of you're neurotic, you think you're being followed. The David, that monster, could be here. Someone possessed by David could be here. It's true. But a composed character, you might not be so hard on that. You might leave it more open or give them a sense that they can fight it. So yeah, you think you see something in the dark, but you remember you have your gun, so do you want to get it? And leave suggestions. So you act as this voice of insanity, stability in the character's mind. But you'll notice that anxious, like realistically, should come way before in the stability track. So anxious is at critical stress, and it's before neurotic. You can make an argument that the character is anxious before becoming neurotic. So don't take it like at face value. Just that's the typical state of the character. So at most, basically, there's a deep anxiety they cannot get rid of. So at the most basic, they are shaken. They are like, and it adds up. So you don't stop being an uneasy and you don't stop being unfocused because you are distressed. It's a cumulative, like it adds up, it stacks up. So you're just overall just feeling worse as time goes on, as the story, is played. Yeah. I think that's it. We'll get into advantages and maybe disadvantages. I don't remember now that interact with Keep It Together. I think some disadvantages require the player to keep it together at certain points. Mm-hmm. But we can, since there are so few disadvantages, we can go over them one by one, at least in brief, and discuss the results, the different results. But sure. One big, and if you don't have anything else to say about keeping it together, I would just move on to See Through the Illusion.
I think that sounds good.
I think that's it. And yeah, I think one of the last things that I just want to say to this is like the one important thing that is here with Keep It Together and the broken condition is that is a chance for really changing a character's profile when it undergoes a change, and you really can kind of re-attribute or reallocate kind of your character's statistics, and he becomes a different persona, but that also should reflect in the gameplay. And so like that's why like it is sometimes interesting to have the character break early, because he then changes from an academic to an Avenger or something, and you suddenly have a completely different game dynamic that you want to have. So I think that's just something to mention also, like why, depending on what your story is, you might want to have your characters break early so that they can change into a different character, because that is needed to kind of fulfill the game or something.
Especially if you're playing a longer game where you
Campaign,
have like a campaign where you have chapters. So I agree that you do want to still plan more or less when a character is going to break, and probably have it be at the end of sort of a smaller story arc within a campaign, if it's going to happen, right? Yeah.
Yep.
And closing the keep it together discussion.
Yes.
When you're at critical stress, and one of the major points of madness is the illusion. But before we see through the illusion and enjoy the +1 modifier of being nearly broken, I have to explain some things for new Kult GMs.
What is the illusion?
What is the illusion? Okay, big can of worms. You're about to become aware if you've been a sleeper.
Spoilers.
Thus far. Okay, so the illusion is the way the principles, the archons and death angels keep humanity trapped. At the very, 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 very basic, we have 3 prisons, one being the mind, one being the body, and one being the world we live in, which is called the Elysium, or sometimes, most of the times, illusion, the illusion. And the body and the mind are fully better, explored in the Illusion and the Borderlands source book, and I'll keep to the core rules. So Elysium is the false world. It is the fallen world. Everything you do is part of the prison. The house you live in probably is, if you're not in the Borderlands, which we'll get into shortly. The handgun you keep to your safety is part of the illusion. The friends you have, they are all sleepers in the sense that they don't realize there is more to this world. The sky you see, illusion. The gods you worship, illusion. The systems you've built, illusion. It's all meant to keep you trapped. That's the core, very core basics of Kult. Meaning that what you do, what the games you play, the stories you run, most of the time they will be run inside the illusion, inside the false world. And the crime scene is in Elysium. Most of them, I figure like 99.9999999% of them are in the illusion. And there are other worlds, obviously, described in the book, but between Elysium and these other worlds are the Borderlands. And in the Borderlands, reality shifts. And it shifts in a way that most of us, the vast majority of humanity, can't even realize the inconsistencies of. Most people move to the Borderlands and they don't even realize. And what is the Borderlands? Most of the time, it's a physical place where the veil, also called the illusion, wears thin. The machinery of the illusion fails. It can be that a dream invades reality, like someone has been sleeping for decades and they don't die. They don't need food or water. They just lie there sleeping, and the world around them shifts and the dreams crawl into the waking world. And we go to this place, but we cannot see the creatures. We cannot see the world being shifted, the hidden rooms, staircases, the hidden buildings, and it has a different look. We see it as we would see any abandoned building, for example. But the illusion there is that this is not an average abandoned building. And when we see through the illusion, we realize that the stairs flow into the sky, and we might see that there's a door where there was none before, or we might finally see that the people sleeping by the darkened corridors are actually like corpses, and they wriggle and then come at you. For a better example, imagine Silent Hill, a beloved, very cultish game. There's the normal Silent Hill that you see, and then there's the fog world when the fog rolls in. That would be the Borderlands, that you get to see the creatures, but they're like strange, and you have to come real close to see them. And then there's the other side. And when you see through the illusion, it's when you enter those areas where the other side would be. So you walk in the hospital and you enter a corridor, and the walls begin to peel. Rust covers every inch of ceiling and floor and whatever, and you see barbed wire running through the place. Maybe you're not even into the illusion, into Elysium anymore. And that's for the GM to decide, obviously. But seeing through the illusion is, at last, seeing this corridor that no one else can see. Realizing that when fog rolls in, everyone vanishes. But those that can see through the illusion don't see the fog, they don't see the monsters. They might even bump into the monsters and not feel anything, they just continue their lives. And one thing important about this, that it is super relevant, is that not everywhere is a borderland. Like most of Elysium, most of the illusion is just what we see. A busy Starbucks is just a busy Starbucks. The barista is not a monster. When you look into the darkened bathroom, it is just a darkened bathroom. There is no hell. There is no machinery behind the wall. It is just that. It really is just that. But when the world goes dark and you venture in the darkened streets to a place you haven't seen before, when you grapple with your madness, when something shocks you, when you're deeply hurt and fleeing a creature, maybe you venture into the Borderlands. And that's where I think most of the Kult games happen. Not even in the other worlds, other realms, in the Borderlands. Most of it.
I might make the argument that Starbucks has set up shop in the Borderlands in most areas at this point, but
It is its own place of hell.
Maybe there's no illusion. It is
Maybe
what it
there's no
is.
illusion.
There's nothing to fool you, which is also when you don't call for see through the illusion. There's nothing hidden here. You just see things as they are. Anything you want to add about the setting that I may have forgotten? I don't want to get into the Borderlands being a state of existence. Like you don't know if you're dreaming or not.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we touched on it in kind of the discussions before, that there are times in the game where the players might realize that something is not as it seems, that something lurks amongst you that you first didn't see if they're sleepers, and when they start to notice these issues that glitch in the matrix, as they say, that something is wrong around them, but they can't really, or maybe won't want to understand it in the first place. But then, depending on how and what happens, they might learn about it no matter what.
One
yeah, that
good
brings-
example
Yeah.
would be, if you haven't seen Hellraiser, which is the Paramount cultish thing, you should see
Or
it.
Reddit,
Yeah.
the Hellbound Heart.
The house is in the Borderlands. It borders a purgatory. And if you are anywhere but the attic, there's no point in seeing through the illusion. There's nothing to see in the living room. There's nothing to see in the bedroom. There's nothing to see in the bathroom. Maybe there is. It's your game. But when you go to the attic in the dead of night, then you kind of hear things and you get hints. One of the GM principles is to insinuate the supernatural. So regardless of not having anything in the other areas, there will be scratches, there will be some screaming in the dead of night, there will be whispers and nightmares that guide you to the attic. And in the attic, you'll be able to see through the illusion, because that's the area where the illusion is at its weakest. And there is an illusion. Example.
I just to expand on that, and this is not me by any means discouraging from reading the core book or the cosmology or anything, because I highly recommend everybody reads the cosmology of Kult. It's incredibly amazing, and I really enjoyed it. However, if you don't have time, or if you just don't want to spoil yourself of all the cosmology for whatever reason, you can also use stuff like Clive Barker. I mean, he much of his writing, especially if you're looking at Hellbound Heart, which is what Hellraiser is adapted from, Books of Blood. The very first scene written in Books of Blood is this woman seeing through the illusion, and you can use these sort of examples, Silent Hill, that sort of thing. You can use these things in your games if you don't have a broader knowledge of the cult cosmology.
And continuing on this, it might be more interesting if you actually, as a GM, read the sections, but maybe disencourage the players to not spoil themselves about all the fun that are in these fantastic books, if they have them. Because it is much more fun if you can have players that can indulge in the game but not really know what is happening and what is kind of appearing around them, how this whole thing works. Once they figure it out, or think they have figured it out, it is so much more fun then to continue to play with them. So that's maybe just my 2 cents on you as a GM, read it, but as players, maybe don't, because you learn much more about it if you play it. I mean, once you've played it, you can read it, but I think it is much more fun.
And building here on sometimes there's nothing to see. And when we finish this, I urge you to go back to the core rules and read through the illusion section again with new eyes, thinking of you as a new GM trying to understand what's going on in the world. The illusion is also a barrier. It is also made to keep things out. Just like a prison, prisoners can't go out, inmates can't go out, and we cannot go in out of our own volition. And the idea is, if you're in the Starbucks, even if it's in the Borderlands, and the illusion is strong, the veil is strong, creatures from the other side will have trouble to get in. And the way they affect the world is different. So in the Hellraiser house, because the attic is where the veil is at the thinnest, you will hear scratching, you will hear screaming, you will enter the attic sometime and there will be leaking blood or whatever. But in the living room, you get just some flashes in the TV, maybe just like a flicker of some horrid shape that you don't even see what truly is. And maybe that's when you roll to see through the illusion if these shapes keep coming, But ideally, it should feel somewhat safer for the character. And taking Crystal, for example, let's say that this detective is an occultist that realizes that there's places in the world where the veil wears thin. She knows that in a bustling Central Park with kids screaming and people playing soccer and having picnics, David can't get her there. But it also feels like an illusionary world. Like these people are super heavily detached from her reality. And I think that's where the cult spice comes in, because you sense there should be noticeable when the character is in a place where the veil wears thin and where it is strong. That said, just because the veil is thin doesn't mean the character can see through all the illusions, through all of the mysteries, and it follows the same rules. So one place, the illusion is that people die. Maybe it's a clandestine clinic of a night doctor, and only the doctor knows that people don't die. So the surgeries are insane. But the first time you go in, you do see the body bags and they don't move. But then you go through one surgery because you're a criminal and you need to be patched up and you're recovering in your room, and you look to the bed next to yours and you see something squirm and not stop bleeding. And you realize, wasn't this guy dead? That can be one illusion. You've seen through the illusion. Maybe there's no hidden worlds behind the wall or down the toilet or out the window, but there's the illusion of death, and you've seen through it. Same goes for every other thing. Maybe the place is just what you see, but the illusion is the creature. So taking the jailers, for example, the lictors and resides, they may walk into places where the illusion is strong because they are jailers and they do that, some with more ease than others. But when you see a lictor, shaped as the president on the TV screen, and you get that glimpse of, oh my god, this is a big evil Chungus. Okay, what do I do now? Has anyone else seen that? And then you realize that no, it's just a bald monstrosity, like bloated creature. So it's a creature that breaches the illusion. And these are special creatures, like children of the night who have trouble, following our detective Crystal into the sunlit world because they are children of the night. They will be in places where it is dark, where they can hunt, where they feel at ease, because they sense that the world punishes them from leaving those areas into places where the veil is strong. So this is a clear description of a barrier. Another one is ghosts. I'd say that you can use the veil as this actual impossibility to see the ghost, whatever it is. Maybe it's a specter, whatever, or a phantom, or a dream being, or whatever. But when you see through the illusion, you see the thing. But they are locked beyond the veil still. In maybe they see the world differently. Maybe you see the abandoned building, but they see a prison and they try to escape as well. So different realities, different overlapping, like overlaying stuff. And following the GM principle, when you make it clear, not through words, not by saying that this place has a strong illusion, this place has a weak illusion, but by implying the mystery of the place, you push the characters to points where they see through the illusion. That covers, I think, almost all of the questions, which is when to call for a move.
Yeah.
But we can talk about the move too.
Yeah. I think David and I were talking about this before we sat down here. So seeing through the illusion, do you see through the illusion no matter what you roll? It's just different things.
Yeah.
Different consequences happen depending on success or failure.
Let's unpack this.
Yeah.
We do have 2 versions as of now of See Through the Illusion. 3 to be more precise. We have one in the core rules, one in the Illusion and the Borderlands, which was written by me, and one in the famous Player Moves 2.0 part of the Kult Drops. We will cover See Through the Illusion in the core rules. Maybe if Crystal and David want to talk about the one in the Illusion and the Borderlands, we can, but
we can have a different video of additional rules, probably. Yeah.
The idea here is, again, with the other moves, can you do something safely? Right? See Through the Illusion. So trigger is when you suffer shock, injuries, or distort your perception through drugs or rituals, meaning that when you actively do something to see through the illusion, maybe it's a ritual, maybe you're following, the insane descriptions of Crystal that, she smoked so-and-so and used so-and-so and whatever, and now you did the same, and now you got to see through the illusion, sort of like a ritual thing. Either way, it's a passive and active thing. As a GM, you can call it whenever you feel like it, whenever it seems appropriate. But it is more part of the trigger that I've written for the Illusion and the Borderlands. But either way, if those things happen, either of those things, so emotional shock from keep it together, taking a wound in middle of combat, fleeing a creature as you're scared and screaming, whatever. 15 plus, you see things as they truly are, and you as a GM have to decide what is it, what is about reality that was being hidden. 10, 14, you see reality, you see through the illusion, but you also affect it somehow. So something senses you means that something else realizes you've seen through the illusion, you've breached through the veil. So maybe if you're that criminal in the night doctor clinic, the body next to you realizes you can see him now and begins to scream for help, for you to help him. Or a lictor sees a disturbance in the veil and now could be after you. Spirits of madness or passion, like hovering you, following you around, realize that you can see them. And the illusion tears around you is a very dramatic thing that you see through the illusion. Okay, fuck you. You see everything and it shocks you. Sorry. These are the 2 options for the success with a complication. And -9 is the GM explains what you see. So, do you see through the illusion even on a failure? Yeah, can be if the GM wants, but not safely. So you somehow expose yourself. Maybe you lose stability. Maybe it's one of the cosmic horror moments where things don't make sense and you just... And maybe you have to keep it together. Maybe you just lose stability. Maybe you trigger a disadvantage because now you see... Because the GM had this madness spirits. And when you see through the illusion, they can act against you. So it depends. It can be fully, it can be partly. Maybe you can see the true nature of a creature, but you can't see where she goes to when she enters the darkness, because you can see the corridors that lead to her nest, or something like that. It can be brief. It can be long, extended.
I can actually imagine a situation where if somebody is actively trying to see through the illusion through drugs or a ritual, then a -9 would be like, you don't see anything. You went through all this time and energy and all this
it can be
stuff, and you see nothing.
And again, me with the pressure thing, if you're resolving
what do you do?
If you're resolving the conflict, you see nothing. I don't want more pressure. I don't want to add to the story. Or maybe I want, and maybe you're locked into this eternal bad trip that you see yourself locked in this labyrinth. It was just a room, but now you see how the world shifts around you and you cannot leave anymore. So it's about the pressure. It's always about the pressure.
Right.
So,
right.
Does the player see? Can be, not safely. And an addendum here, there's the advantage enhanced senses, enhanced awareness, where the player has the option to do so more safely, see through the illusion more safely. Despite of what happens, it's more controlled, and the advantage explains how so. There's other advantages that let the players see through the illusion through different means, like forbidden inspiration off the top of my head, maybe. They perform some kind of art and see into another place, like paint the true nature of a building or person or whatever. There's some specific ritual-oriented advantages that you can perform a ritual to see through the illusion, maybe as a group. I think it's cult leader, something like that. But there's options.
Yeah.
So there's different ways. And when do you do either? If I have enhanced awareness, but I suffer emotional shock and I get to see through the illusion, like sort of passively because the GM wants so. That's one option. That's one move that is being triggered because I'm not actively focusing my senses as the advantage tells me to. So options, different buttons to press, different things to do as a GM, and ways to take the story. In the illusion, in the Borderlands book, we have the other version of See Through the Illusion. We can maybe expand it a bit further in another episode about the illusion and the Borderlands, if we have it. But the trigger is different. It is when your senses are distorted by magic, drugs, madness, physical or emotional shock, and / or the illusion fails to disguise something, roll plus soul to see through the illusion. It is more passive, and it always implies that your senses are being distorted by something. If it's passively by magic or drugs, maybe it's a magical effect by a creature, maybe someone blasts you with enhanced awareness or whatever. And there's also the possibility that the illusion just shatters. So maybe something happens, your madness is unleashed, and it shatters the illusion. There's some GM moves to shatter the illusion, also in the madness section of the book, whatever. 15 plus, you see something, and that's the key word here. You see something for what it is. So the GM decides whether it's the creature, the location, can be everything all at once. It depends, but it's on the GM. It makes clearer for the GM. And the 1014 changes also. It says, you see through the illusion, but it is fleeting. It is a fleeting, partial, and/or shocking glimpse. So it reduces it focuses what you see, the revelation, and the GM chooses one. So it's a bunch of moves like engaged in combat, like it throws you off balance is one of the moves. It will haunt you later. It provokes a shock response. Something senses you. The illusion strengthens soon after, or the illusion shatters. All of them fully described in the book. If you don't have it, consider picking it up. But all of them interact with the system in a different way. So the player can have a negative modifier from the shock. The player can lose stability from the shock. So it hammers the idea of unsafely seeing through the illusion. And a -9 says, you may still see something, but the experience is particularly terrifying, confusing, or there is a troublesome malfunction in the illusion, and the GM makes a move. So you get to do all of the above, any in whatever hardness or softness of a GM move you want. Maybe everyone is dragged with the person into whatever lies beyond the veil. Maybe the creature's disguise is fully unveiled and everyone has to keep it together to not freeze in shock. Whatever. Bunch of options. Different way to tackle the move and attribute. But I think, at the very least, it helps people to see it a bit differently. So, even from this conversation, you can run it as I described.
To summarize, basically, one more time, you basically use the see through the illusion in a passive way, in a sense of the player experiences something. It is not usually initiated by the player, but it is a reaction to the environment that is kind of happening around them, or to a active involvement that the player has, drugs, violence, gore, something that happens
Ritual,
to
magic.
them as a ritual and stuff. Exactly. And so succeeding means that, I think, taking both versions, the consensus about a 15 plus is that you perceive something, but also it's not what you anticipated, or like the illusion does indeed change around you, and you understand that there's something more to this world. The mixed successes would be something where the consequence of seeing this, of understanding that there's more, that something either senses you or the world around you basically just starts to break because it has lost its grip on you, and you suddenly are lost in this in between. And then at -9, it's pretty much open to the GM's interpretation for the scene as well. We kind of flush this now out.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would just add that 15 plus, the character retains a bit more control.
Yeah, exactly.
Over it. And -9, there's no control. You do a hard move, like a harder move.
Yep.
And it's really up to you what happens. There's a bunch of options described in the guidance below the move, and I encourage anyone feeling weird about it to read the move again and then read the illusion chapter again.
Yeah.
It might change your perspective now that you have this conversation in mind.
Yeah.
And I think it counts as well with like any of the other moves, or like especially like keep it together. As a GM, don't overuse it because it's losing its touch. It should be something, that you build up to, and it should be something significant.
Yeah, I'd say that most of the time, Siege of the Illusion is uncalled for. If you want players to realize something, you should just show them. And the core, the very first, I believe, but do correct me if I'm wrong, the very first GM principle is to insinuate the supernatural, and Siege of the Illusion is used a lot for that. But you shouldn't do it like this. If you're just Siege of the Illusion to see if you catch someone scratching the floorboards of the attic, you can just tell players that happens. You can just set the scene in this way, set it as announcing an off-screen problem, which is a GM move, a very soft one at times. And at this time it would be, you hear scratching in the attic, and there's the opportunity to go there and investigate. But this is not a Siege of the Illusion. Same would go for if it's generally, if it's a minor thing, if you just want to reveal the face of a creature, if you just want to reveal that the place shifts when the character isn't looking, you can just insinuate the supernatural and tell there's a door where there shouldn't be any. Just say there's a new corridor. Just say that the players walk too far into the room, and by logic of the blueprint of the building, they should be outside of the blueprint. But the building might accommodate such a big room, but it doesn't seem when looking at the map. So you can just do things. You don't have to roll to see through the illusion. So you're right in the sense that reserve it and don't use it as softly all the time.
And I think we have successfully covered the basics, I think. Wow.
I think so.
Even I learned something. And yeah, I think with that, we're going to wrap for today. Thank you again, Gabe, for introducing us to your perspective and understanding of the cult rules as written, and how to deal with the basics of Kult Divinity Lost as a GM.
There's a lot more to say. Sorry to cut you.
No. We will have a lot more to say, and we will have probably a couple more episodes where we discuss various of the other aspects of it. So if you like this, if you have any other comments, we will put up a form for you to fill out that will be up for the whole time. So you can give us your questions, maybe something that we didn't explain enough. Feel free to ask us as well as about this, or just put it into the description below. We'll have a couple more things to cover: advantages, disadvantages, the whole conflict section, homebrew stuff, maybe also a bit about the backstories and how to incorporate them into the story, including the character advancement, and then obviously the full playthrough of our investigation campaign. But yeah, anything related to investigation and how to properly deal with this.
Yes.
Cool. Thank you again, Gabe and Crystal.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Talking, and see you next time.
See ya.
Bye.